Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Speak and Flow podcast. Today, I have a wonderful friend who I've known for many, many years, over 6 years. Along our entrepreneurial journey, we have crossed paths, and she is an amazing person, wonderful heart, but also so smart and has a big vision and a wonderful, innovative, out of the box way of thinking about therapy. And so I brought her on because I believe that this insight is going to help us along our leadership journey and also along finding our voice. And so I'm so glad to have her today. We have Persephone Brooks. Hi, Persephone.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Glad you're here. And so, Persephone, I know you have an out of the box way of thinking about therapy. Before we go into that, can you just share a little bit about the traditional approach, how we currently see therapy and what's happening there?
Sure. I'm a therapist by
Uh-huh.
trade.
Yes.
So I have, working the community as well as private practice. And the pattern that I see is we really focus more on the behavior. Whether
Mhm.
it's the problem of mental health or problem of, working with kids, the behavior, we want them to do better. Don't do this. We want them to do that instead. And so therapy seems to be more about getting rid of something. And even when it's
Mhm.
around goals, it's still trying to get rid of something. And so that's the biggest thing that I've noticed is that there's so much emphasis on what we don't like,
Yeah,
trying to get rid of it. And
right.
I believe it's a problem.
Right. And so they shine the light on the problem. And don't we do that also when we're in corporate and they shine the light on? So we may have done so many things right. And then they do a performance evaluation and then they shine the light on this one problem. And we're like, oh, there's this problem. And then there's this big emphasis on the problem. And so that's what's happening in therapy too.
Right. Well, as a
And
culture, we're problem
right.
focused.
Yeah.
Think of, as a little child, when we go to school, what do they
Yeah.
focus on? Usually the
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
Parenting, what do they focus on? Usually the problem. And so it's not a surprise in infiltrated business and
Hmm.
leadership
Hmm.
because we do want our team to be better. We want to be
Hmm.
better.
Hmm.
Um, but I found the more we focus on the problem gets bigger.
Mm. And so we're so focused on it, it gets bigger, and then it gets just that it consumes us.
Yes.
So on the alternative, what is the alternative? How do you see a different approach?
Um, Before I go there, the other place
Uh-huh.
where we focus on problems is our
Uh-huh.
own personal thoughts. How many
Right.
times do we have the negative thinking
Right.
about a problem? Oh my goodness,
Right.
someone didn't call me. That's a big problem. Oh my goodness, the traffic is, just going very slow. That's a problem. And so we have such a huge mindset to really focus on the problem.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that because we're all constantly thinking. And so how we communicate to others, also about how we communicate with ourselves. And so we're constantly thinking about problems and we have a lot of what is the negative, like what is the self-talk that we have when we're looking at the problems? We're saying that's the problem, like, okay, there's traffic, or my child is so lazy, or my child is not doing this, and that's the problem. And so then we're saying that in our minds and then it
Right,
gets bigger and then we
right,
get more irritated and
right,
frustrated, but then we try to fix it and we think that that's how we fix it.
right. So the brain likes to solve problems. It's
Yes.
it's designed, and our
Yes.
nervous system is designed to find things that could be dangerous, aka
Right.
problems. So our body and brain is all wired that way, but that does not necessarily mean we have to act that way. And that's the biggest thing is both the mental health and parenting and business. A lot of times we focus more on what we see about what's going on which isn't a bad approach, but it only could go so far. When you focus on the problem, it's like pulling a weed in your garden. If you pull a weed from a garden, and if you do nothing with that spot, another weed is going to take its place. It's a given. Either the same weed or another type of weed. So, and that's the biggest problem with addictions. You move smoking and then you move to maybe drinking alcohol instead, or or something less like workaholism, where we're working really hard. And so it's a bigger problem. So, as you asked, what is the fits? What's the flip side?
Yeah.
And the flip side, I believe, is two things. One is really understand our values. Values, is a big key word nowadays in business, is leaderships are trying to find people's values. But it's not about what we think our values are. Like, I really believe I'm an honest person. And I really believe that I am kind and I'm thoughtful. And there's evidence showing that. But there's also evidence, unfortunately, because I'm human, showing the opposite direction. And it's not about if we want it that way. It's what our lives are currently demonstrating. And that shows our highest value. So when we hear people saying, I want a job, and they're sitting on the couch and doing absolutely nothing, maybe playing video games or been watching on Netflix. But they always were like, I want a job, I want a job, I want a job. Our mind's like, well, get off the couch and do something, type of thing. And so, there's that's true. But we don't understand where they're coming from. And oftentimes they're coming from their values. And they may not value having a job. And so if they don't value having a job, they're not going to take the steps necessary in order to get one.
So how do we go about finding our highest value?
Well, there's many different ways. The one that I found that was very helpful for me is I've been studying under Dr. Demartini. He has a value determination. It's a 13 questions.
Yeah.
I find it very helpful, but I did find it at the beginning very frustrating, because when you first sign on, they ask, what's the 3 most important in each category, and your brain's like, 3 most.
Right.
What's the, and my brain, like, for a long time could not think of what it was.
Right, because we're not used to thinking about these type of things.
Right. No, if the question was, what's your 3 problem areas in energy, how you spend your time,
like my health is not right, I'm tired,
and what's 3 things that surrounds you that you don't like? We have a whole list of and so our brains are so wired to think of what we don't want, what we don't like. And so it's really hard sometimes. And then a lot of times, with our values that we are writing down, we're thinking of a future self of, I value being I value, making a difference. My job is, I feel like, to help people, to prove myself so we can make a better world. But if I see myself as a motivating speaker and an author and a coach, and all those are things I'm working towards, and those are great thing, but not all of that is showing evidence in my life right now.
Okay. And so what would you say if I'm trying to aspire to that? How do I find the true highest value? Filling out that form, you think that John Demartini will help to find out the true value? So let's say I'm aspiring to it, but it's really not evident in my life. Was that what helped you to figure that out?
I think his form is very helpful.
Okay.
But actually, you could just look. I mean, and it's also very helpful because he goes through 13 specific areas. that it's very helpful to identify, because,
Right.
our values, there's a pattern.
Yeah.
And so, for example, where do we spend our most money on? Most of
Right.
us will probably say personal development, leadership
Right.
skills,
Right.
working, how can I improve my position? So it's, we're very business oriented. We're,
Mm-hmm.
working on personal development. And
Mm-hmm.
so that would be one, or two categories: personal development and business oriented.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and those are showing evidence because your bank account literally shows you, or your credit
Mm-hmm.
cards, whatever you're using,
Mm-hmm.
and that you are spending a lot more on those instead of, let's
Mm-hmm.
just say, your friend is socializing more,
Mm-hmm.
any party, any, events that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
she's there or he's there. So they're going to have a different value with,
Mm-hmm.
which is, being able to do these social events.
So yeah. So once someone finds their value, what is that like when they have a highest value, they understand their highest value, then what is the talk that's going on in their head? What's the difference that they feel, or what's the change?
The two things that I see is being able to realize sometimes why we have value conflicts. Like if you really value work and you really value family, and then you are feeling guilty at work not being with your family, and when you're
Right.
at your family you're too busy thinking about work,
Yeah.
it's helpful to identify which one is higher
Okay.
on
And do they
it.
flop depending on the day? I could,
Sometimes they do
yeah.
flip and flop depending on, but usually we're creatures of habit.
Oh,
We
okay.
like things in a certain way. And most of the time, the biggest problem I see as I'm seeing people is they're working on a lower value.
Mm-hmm.
And then that runs into more problems. So they're not really honoring our highest values because they're so busy trying to maintain a lower value, which
Mm.
our brains, our minds, we're not motivated very well when we're doing
Mm-hmm.
something lower on our
Mm-hmm.
values. We
Mm-hmm.
we self-sabotage. We have to use a lot more coping skills. There's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
things that triggers us. We might have more anxiety, more depression, just because we're not really honoring our highest values. So, for
Maybe because we're
example,
so focused, we're focused also on solving the problem. We have no more energy.
exactly right.
Is that
So
right?
why spend so much energy on something that is not to your highest value? And there's a way to work with the lower values, like, parents, if sometimes we would like to not worry about spouse and
Yes.
kids or
Yeah.
pets as much as we have to, because, we're in a focus. We are a leader. We're trying to, um, get our voice out.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so sometimes it's just like, how do I work with that? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where looking at your values. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, one of my highest values, this is not a typical value,
Right.
but it's meaningful to me. And
Right.
it's an element of play. I
Right.
have to have an
That's how I love it.
element of play,
Yeah. Yeah.
more spontaneous, more like a kid where, they see a leaf and it becomes a boat, and they
Uh-huh.
put it in a lake, and they're like, or a little stream, and now it becomes a big lake, and they're making this like story up as they're going along, that type of play.
Right.
uh, and so I find that the times I enjoy my job, doing chores by itself, um, um, if I don't have an element to play, it gets really, really boring for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like pulling teeth. And the other way that I've also used this element to play without realizing on how important it was is
Mm-hmm.
I have taken some hard classes where it challenged me. One
Mm.
of them is Spanish. And so how do I, these words are foreign, but,
Yeah.
how do I link those, the words with the definitions and get familiar? So I
Yeah.
created my own memory.
Mm-hmm.
So I write the Spanish word on one side, and then on the other side, I write what it means. And on the flip side, I write, and then I play matching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that element of play just made me really enjoy the process. I'm not fighting it. I'm able to do really well on the test because I spend so
Mm-hmm.
much time. And that's the benefit of operating from a higher value,
Right.
where
Right.
something which would be harder. If I just did the typical what you do when
Right.
you're studying for a test and you're learning Spanish, for example,
Right.
I won't have a lot of energy. My motivation would be killed. It would take me a lot longer to do the activities.
Mm-hmm.
Homework would be, oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to use a lot of coping skills afterwards just because I feel
Mm-hmm.
drained.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe my anxiety is up. Or maybe, I open up the textbook. I don't know about you. And I'm like, I can't
Right.
do that. And I'm
Right.
out. Um,
Right.
and so that's the thing that I really like about values. Values are so important.
I love that. I love how you integrate it into your everyday life and bringing in your highest value, even in the most monotonous things that you probably see. Maybe they've been traditionally told you, hey, you're not good at Spanish. And so now suddenly there's the problem again. And now I still have to do Spanish or do something at work. But then now you're bringing in a value into something that's just like of an everyday life, your highest value into everyday life. And that helps you to do better, to feel better, or to make it
mhm,
more fun for you and alive. That's
right.
awesome. Yeah.
And the second thing that, besides values, is also don't get so stuck on the label of the problem.
Uh-huh.
That
Right.
by itself could make someone being so rigid.
Right.
Unfortunately, words have forgotten, they're really
Mm-hmm.
neutral. A hammer
Mm-hmm.
is really just a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
But in our society, it could use it, to build things and be wonderful, or we can use it
Mm-hmm.
as a weapon and use it to
Mm-hmm.
harm people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the words that we use in mental health, for example, anxiety, depression,
Mm-hmm.
PTSD,
Oh, right.
hyperreactive, ADD,
Right.
autism, those
Right.
actually have a negative connotation connected to it.
Right. It feels so yeah. It breaks my heart. And then the person receives this as this negative connotation, and yeah. So tell me more about that. Then what happens, right? Then they feel like it's a problem they have to fix, and then they go down
Right,
to trying to fix this problem, and it gets exacerbated, and it doesn't ever really truly go away, like because it's like a label that I've been, you know,
right,
um, that's me, and it's not
right,
when you have all these other parts of you, like your values that are highest, and then bringing those out, right? Because you're so focused and not paying attention to them because you're so focused on this label.
right. Because let's face it, with those labels, we have now pulled in the ego.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now the ego is wired to keep that because that's our identity.
Mm,
Anything that has become our identity is a lot harder to get rid of. So if you say,
yeah.
I'm a person with anxiety, or I have ADD.
Right.
I'm
And
stupid. I'm dumb. I'm not a leader. All those thoughts that we have in our heads. And if we give value to them from our identity, our ego is designed to defend them, even if
mm,
they're wrong. They
wow.
will make it right.
Wow.
That's the power of our brains. So,
Wow.
and then also being able to have these labels are great,
Mm-hmm.
but it gets, because it does help you to know you're normal, you're natural. Other people have these issues, but you
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't just
Mm-hmm.
stay there.
Right. Right.
Um, and
Right.
so that's the biggest things that I find working with my clients is that they've
Mm-hmm.
been given these labels
Mm-hmm.
and it has become their identity. So it's
Mm-hmm.
a lot different saying, I'm an alcoholic
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm a person who right now is struggling with drinking. Those are
Mm-hmm.
two different feels.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um,
Right.
and it is very important. This
Right.
skill I learned from a wonderful doctor. I still don't remember his name. I think his Dr. Holloway, where he has ADD himself. He wrote a
Uh-huh.
book. If you're interested, let her know, and I'll send that information.
Yeah.
And so what he taught me is, and I was already on the trend of that already, just from
Mm-hmm.
my own personal life and what I'm seeing,
Uh-huh.
is that everything that we see as a negative, there's always a positive thing connected with
Right.
it.
Right.
And so one example, doing a conference that he held for parents, he was helping parents understand that all the negative labels or all the things that they're seeing in their children are usually negative labels, and they need to find something positive.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite of this one is there's a mom who raises her hand. What? You can't help me with this one. My son is awful. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, tell me about him. And so she describes the teenager being so lazy,
Mm-hmm.
where he's not helping with the chores, not doing his homework, to the beyond the typical teenager thing. And she says, I am so sick of him being so lazy. So that's the thing I want you to fix him,
Right.
is
Right.
he's lazy. What's the positive side of being lazy?
Mm-hmm.
I was scratching my head because I'm like, what is the positive side of being lazy?
Mm-hmm.
But this doctor, he's like, didn't bat an eye. He's like, well,
Right.
what the positive side is, they're conserving energy. So basically, doing chores, doing homework is not high on his values.
Mm-hmm.
It's high on mom's values, but not high on kiddos' values. And so mom didn't understand that he's not going to invest his energy into any project that he doesn't see how it's going to benefit him. And as leaders, isn't that exactly what we are trying to do? How do
Right.
we motivate the people who are underneath us or who are
Right.
around us,
Right.
do things what we would like them to do,
Right.
or what our company needs in order to grow,
Right.
but they may not be aligned with that value, with that
Mm-hmm.
task. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really challenging about how do you work with someone who is coming from a different value than you. And reality
Right.
is, we all are coming from different values. Even
Mm-hmm.
if everybody matches the same, our implementation of those values are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my other values is information, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
information where it's trivial, where I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go on Jeopardy and all these wonderful
Mm-hmm.
things and answer all these wonderful questions. Because to me,
Mm-hmm.
I really don't care. I don't care,
Mm-hmm.
who was born
About
in
that.
1987 in England and what
Right.
did they did. And I think it's fascinating. I don't mind learning that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not something that's, I'm just so determined to know all that information. I find, if I need that information, I Google it.
Right.
But
But
information about growth and personal
right.
development
Me
and the
too.
brain and neuroscience and all these different things, those are the things I'm driven to.
Mm-hmm. And so how so he's this person is conserving the energy. And so like you mentioned, how do leaders, if they know that the person has a different value, or I have a set of values and I want them to also have that value, but they don't. Let's just say like they're conserving energy. So how do we find the match, or how do we understand the other person's values to try to motivate them?
Right.
Yeah.
And and that was one of my biggest questions, is
Yeah.
how do we, and that's what I kind of feel like a lot of problems in society, where it's Democrats or Republicans or
Yeah.
African Americans against the majority, the
Uh-huh.
minors versus
Uh-huh.
majority,
Uh-huh.
and so it's so polarized. How do we
Uh-huh.
even do that
Right.
as well? um
Right.
And so luckily, for me, I've been learning from DeMartini a little bit more about how to work with people's values. How do we help them? And the main thing that I walked away with, even though I am certified to helping people to identify their values and answer that question, for leaders, one is to be able to hire people within their values. So if you already know that they are, really good at organization and being able to communicate, then you wouldn't necessarily put them in a role where where they're doing, creating projects, or sales technique, or all these different categories. The goal is to be able to hire someone based upon their values, because we want them to thrive in it. And then the other thing is, when it comes to, for this example with this mom and this teenager who she labels as being lazy, she can look at what is his values, and sometimes we have to just ask them or take them through and walk them through so they can identify their values. And then you link up her values with his values.
So what if the values are, I like video games and I like playing with my friends and I like sitting around binging TV. Then how do you link it if it's so different? Like you said, they're so polarized.
Each link is different, and it all depends on what her links are, what her values. This is where I really like it, because it is a moment of play, because you have to think of how can your value support that value. It's not necessarily putting up, well, if you do this for me, I will do this for you. You could do it that way.
But they support each other.
Exactly. And then so you could support each other. DeMartini method actually has a way where you work with them to understand how they link. So for example, what he used was teachers. So if you have a teacher who is doing English, and you have a kid who he wants just to play soccer is life, it's number one. And so he's not willing to do anything. So he walks us through where, you identify specific people, how many of them had to learn how to communicate. Communication is very, very important in a team. First, you have to be able to communicate to your coach. Then you have to be able to communicate as a team. A lot of them, they have foreign people, amidst from different countries. So you have, foreigners with your own native language. And so being able to communicate is very important, not by just verbiage, but also writing, because when we practice writing, we practice our verbal skills too. As well as then you could give him reading assignments about his favorite, soccer players. And then you could, so you build this wonderful life around helping to expand the reading and writing. You're going to even have the math teacher step in. Let's watch this, and in order to kick the ball this way, they have to do certain things. So how, where does your foot, if you kick it this far, how, and so there's a lot of math involved in playing soccer. And so there's so many different, ways of doing it, which is why I like honors classes, because that's kind of the start of this brain picking of how do you implement these things, but also homeschool. Homeschool is also, when these are set up correctly, it takes the individual's likes or the topic that the teacher chose and find different ways of how to implement it. And so I feel like in business, that's exactly what we need to be doing with our people, as well as maybe at home. If you have a child who won't take out the garbage, won't do homework, being able to
Yeah.
identify their values, and find how does your value support them and how do
Right.
their highest values support you. Um,
Wow.
and so you just build up together. So I've been
Wow.
really excited about the values. I also very excited focusing on solutions,
Right.
really.
Right.
Life is about really moving forward on our goals. And since we're
Right.
all business owners or working, leaders, uh, all of us have experienced anxiety at some points. All of us
Yeah.
have, things has gone wrong. People
Right.
have done these things. And so it's not about moving away and focusing only on those problems, because you're never going to have enough energy, as you mentioned before, to work
Yeah.
on the things that really matter.
And it's not, and then like you said, I mean, if all leaders in companies started to shift, right, versus spend so much time trying to fix the problem, all of our energy shifting over to focusing on not just goals, but the values that we have and learning how
Right.
to keep bringing the alignment between my values and your values, we can make such huge progress. Wow,
Right.
that's so amazing. You're clearly an expert on this. It's so, and I know that our time is running out. Do you have to jump off? You want to spend a little bit of time talking about your book, or do you have to jump off?
I could do a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, so I know you have a book. So tell me about it.
So the book is still in process. So it's
Uh-huh.
not ready to be published yet, but I decided to write about these therapy mistakes. And that's the title right now I'm sitting on. Um, because people do need to understand that when you come to therapy, yes,
Mm-hmm.
if you're coming from a place where you're a victim, you're trying to make sense of the world, focusing on the problem is normal and natural. You should.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um, but I know many people who's been going to therapy for years and never really get any better.
Right.
There it's a great place to vent.
Right.
And therapy is not necessarily designed for just venting. It's designed, or supposed to be designed, for helping people move
Mm-hmm.
and to improve life so we could
Mm-hmm.
thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so one of the things that I really see wrong is obviously focusing on the problem, and because we're not supposed to solely focus on the problem. And the more we focus on the problem, the more we're going to see problems.
Right. And it becomes our identity almost. The ego defends it as part of you.
Yes. And then it becomes a bigger and bigger problem.
Right, right. And then so all the alternatives, so this is what your book's about, talking about some of the mistakes that are happening right now.
Right.
And how much more impactful we can be when we are, at least maybe we have a good understanding about what we want to do or what some of the problems are, but then not staying there. At least you
Right.
have an understanding, maybe that helps you to relate to other people that also are going through it. But then really finding more connection and meaning around more of who you are based on your
Right.
values, and then asking other people to help you to develop it and finding alignment with other people and their values, and therefore you're more productive that way because you're contributing, you're building relationships,
Right.
and then unleashing your voice.
Right. When I see problems, I see is how many things come in our inbox. So if you
Yeah.
spend much
Yeah.
time cleaning on our inbox over
Uh-huh.
and over and over and over, that's going to drain all your energy to respond to the most important things.
Right. Right. Yes.
And so you're not going to have an empty inbox.
Right.
You just,
No.
and that's what we kind of want in life.
Right.
What can we do to avoid all problems or pain and anything that makes me feel uncomfortable? Sorry, reality is you're going to experience those things even as you move forward to the things that you like.
Yeah.
So your options are solely only focus on the problems, which means you can only talk about the problems. Problems are always going to be there. I don't know how many of you know of drama queens and drama kings, and their whole life is spent around these problems. But we also know many wonderful, famous individuals, both in business and non-business, where they are solely focusing on their highest values. All of them, their dreams are within their highest values. And because they're so aligned, when these so-called problems pop up, they're like, not a problem I can handle. At first we might go,
right,
and freak out. But they're like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to take the next best step, which is actually the other trick that would be shared in the book is, they just go for it. They just move. They don't allow that to I have to focus on my problem. And once I have this problem gone, then I will go back and working on our goals.
Right. The trick is finding the highest value and what is truly highest for you, regardless of what everybody's thinking, regardless of what the world says. But that's the key, right? And so when you do that, take the time to do that, either through John Martini's website or reaching out to Persephone, finding that highest value for yourself, those highest values. And isn't that funny that I think when we do that and we're so focused on it, then all those other problems just naturally work itself out.
Right, exactly. And I found that more than 50% of the problems, if you focus on your goals that is rooted in your highest values, they disappear. They fall off because they don't really matter.
Right.
Or you're not as bothered by them. And so we put so much emphasis on problems. And yes, problems is a part of life, but it's about where we focus. We can focus on the problem, which means we're always going to get more problems, which means we're going to be in pain and depressed and anxiety and life sucks and all those negative thoughts is going to overwhelm us. Or we could focus on our highest values that supports our goals of being great leaders and move forward, knowing that we will run into problems. It's not about getting rid of them. It's about growing through them.
Yes. Growing through them and expanding beyond them and reaching more people, helping more people. I love that. Thank you, Persephone. That's beautiful. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing your insight. Really appreciate it. All the work that you do at the counseling center, your therapy, your private sessions. And I can't wait to see your book and read it. I'm excited.
I'll keep you posted.
Yes. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining. Until next episode, I'll see you later.
Bye.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. Are you curious on how you measure up with your ability to speak in flow? Come grab my free self-assessment at https://speakinflow.com/assessment. And I'll see you on the other side.